Welcome to the Filmlings Podcast,
a weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is Week 8 Oscar Bait, or The Unexpected Virtue of Tragedy.
Yes.
Because we watched a lot of sad movies this week, Alex.
Yeah. It tends to be a thing with Oscars. They like drama, and boy, did we get a lot of drama this week. But I will say kudos on the episode title. I really like it.
Yeah, so this week, we, in honor of the Oscars that will have just passed, if you're listening to this, on Sunday, the 26th of February, we are watching the last 3 years of Oscar Best Picture winners.
Right. So first up is 12 Years a Slave, the 2013 Best Picture winner, directed by Steve McQueen. Then it's Birdman from 2014, directed by Alejandro Iñárritu. Apologies if I mispronounced that. I did my best. And then last but not least, Spotlight from last year, directed by Tom McCarthy.
Yep. So we're going to just kind of talk through each of these movies, their different artistic and narrative merits, and kind of speculate, I guess, on how they got put into the Best Picture slot for each of these years. Now, just full disclosure, neither of us are Oscar or Hollywood politics experts, so like I said, most of this is going to be speculation and just kind of what we've seen in these movies that might recommend them.
Right. I think that's one of the big ideas that we're going to tackle this week, with kind of the assumption that we know that the Best Picture is maybe not the best movie of that year, and the best movie of the year is always subjective, but we're looking at what gets you that award more specifically.
Yep.
So the first movie we're going to take a look at is 12 Years a Slave, a very dramatic start. It is a true story, as they make sure to tell you in the first few minutes of the film, about a free black man in the North during the early 1800s by the name of Solomon Northup, who is tricked and then kidnapped by slavers and transported to the South and forced into slavery, forced into bondage to work on plantations for about 12 years, as you would imagine from the title, until he is finally something. We won't spoil it yet because this is not the spoiler section, but rest assured, it's a very dramatic look at a very, very intense, dramatic topic that kind of gave birth to a very controversial topic of talking about racism in modern day America, which I think is kind of what made this such a juicy topic for Oscar voters. But anyway, that's kind of just the basic premise of the movie.
Yeah. And just kind of going over everything, is a very artfully done movie. The cinematography is beautiful, and there are a lot of times where the cinematography almost calls attention to itself. There's some really well done long shots, and all the lighting and everything is just really well done. So it's definitely the production quality is definitely Oscar quality. We could see that right off the bat. Right.
They do a really good job of top to bottom, everything's just done so well. Talking about costume design, talking about acting, talking about the cinematography with just incredible, not just lighting, but intense long shots. Even some that are just really, really long shots of Solomon's face close up as you see this emotion play out. I think I timed a few to be over a minute. It was quite a breathtaking way to shoot a movie.
Yeah, I almost don't want to describe too many of those shots because they're a little spoilery. But the ones that really stand out, maybe we can mention mention later on, but they are very long, and oftentimes they are the most intense points or points that involve suffering, and the camera just lingers and just kind of like makes you feel that moment beat for beat. This is the main thing that I kind of came away with while watching this movie, is that this is a movie that knows how to take its time. And that's something that I really like, because I think a lot of films nowadays feel like they have to constantly be cutting or changing or keeping the audience's interest. And this one just kind of like makes you sit there in the character's brain and really feel what they're feeling and experience that suffering. And of course the film is about the long period of time that he was a slave, and so we kind of feel that waiting and that just kind of dirge of time weighing down on everything.
Right. I mean, I definitely think it was the goal of the film to convey this, but it felt almost like a slice of life movie. Like, this is what it's like to be this person. Rather than like an adventure film. So the goal is to kind of like get into that mindset and show you like how awful it was to be a slave and have those thoughts, and how can you keep hope, and what do you do when this happens and that happens. And they do a good job of showing you the worst, but also showing you all those thoughts and feelings, and drawing it out. And the long shots almost mimic the long period of time and the long period of suffering. It feels like in certain places like the movie is like daring you to blink. Like, we're not going to blink with a cut on this terrible thing that is happening. Will you blink when you're watching it? Which is, it's a really intense way to watch a movie.
Yeah, and as far as kind of feeling the weightiness of time, as just looking at kind of the character, you can definitely see how Solomon's attitude to his situation kind of changes over time. And there's a lot in the story where different characters will sort of represent different mental attitudes that either the slaves have about their situation, or that the masters have about how they use their power and stuff. Because we see Solomon's first master is much more lenient and kind of sees his slaves as people and interacts with them and all this stuff. And then he's transferred to a different master who is much harsher and definitely uses his slave owning position as he kind of gets a high on it, like a power high.
Yeah,
and,
he's got a total god complex going on by the end.
Right. But it's interesting to see the change in Solomon's character, because we're sticking with him and seeing all these other kind of attitude representations around him. And we see at the beginning of his time as a slave, he's very feisty, and he'll kind of push back against authority because he's used to being a free man. I mean, it's kind of how any of us would react to that situation, kind of trying to assert your situation. But as the time goes on, we see him becoming more submissive to the situation that he's in, and he's kind of trying to find a way out. Like, he never loses hope. That's the interesting thing, is he never loses hope, but he starts to accept the new name that he's given, which is I already lost it.
Flat. Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I was totally. I throughout all my notes this week, I referred to him as Solomon, and I had a hard time remembering that too.
Yeah, because as soon as he's captured, basically he's given a different name and kind of forced to accept it as like it's a different identity, and so that kind of creates this contrast between his free identity and his slave identity. But we'll just refer to him as Solomon. But he starts to accept that, and he starts to kind of follow orders more readily, even though, and he still pushes back a little bit, but he gets less and less up until the end. So it's very much kind of a character study, and seeing what that much oppression does to a person's psyche.
Right. That's kind of his whole arc is not giving up hope. He's always trying to get contacts to the north to try to have somebody send down his papers proving that he's free. So that's the challenge. It ends up being less of a physical one. It's not like he's spending the entire screen time trying to get a message north, although that ends up being his main conflict, like physical conflict. But it's watching this inner turmoil and inner, like, what is his self as like a human being? How is that going to respond to all of this pressure on top of it, and all this oppression and punishment and just daily abuse that he suffers as being a slave? Like that.
And at the same time, he's trying to stay alive. So some of his
Also
submission
true,
is
yeah.
just kind of a cunning in ways to not get himself killed by people who will find literally any opportunity to kill him, and then at the same time taking very minute risks where he can to, like we said, get a message somewhere and find people who he thinks he can trust to help him out, which is dangerous. And like we said, it becomes kind of a fight of morale and survival throughout the whole thing.
Right.
So I do want to kind of talk about casting choices, because this is a very interesting film. The casting has to be, I guess, ethno-specific. This is not a film where you can kind of cast people as any ethnicity.
Yeah. So essentially, what race you cast them as, says something. So like if you cast like an African American as a slave owner, which there is one in the film, that's sending a message in the movie. Like, they're very strong choices, which is an interesting way, because as we've talked about it before in the podcast, because it's impossible to not talk about it in America, but race is such a sensitive topic, just because of the place we live in and its history, and this is that history. So all those choices become much more impactful. They have a much bigger impact on the message of the film and of the individual characters within the film.
Right. And so I think it's really interesting to see who is put in each of these roles, because one thing that I noticed is almost every one of the white characters is a pretty big name Hollywood actor, whereas I think only our main characters, Solomon Northup, had done much before this. So most of the African American actors are pretty not like Hollywood people that you would recognize their names and stuff, which is interesting because there are plenty of African American actors that would have fit in well and people would have recognized their names if you just mentioned them. And I don't know, I'm kind of curious about if that means anything or if that was coincidental, but I kind of feel like it was intentional.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting if we had an article or an interview with the casting director or producer to kind of dig into that, because obviously it has the potential to mean a lot, but it's also tempting to dig into it where there might not be anything there, of course.
Right. Right. But just like for an example, we've got, in this movie we've got one of the main characters, Michael Fassbender, Benedict Cumberbatch as the original master. Brad Pitt ends up playing a big role. Paul Giamatti is a bit actor. Sarah Paulson. A lot of names that you recognize right off the bat, whereas our primary African American cast, honestly, I'm not even going to try to pronounce their names because I don't believe I could do it. And they were great. They were all, the young woman who played Patsy got Best Supporting Actress. I mean, they were all wonderful. It's
she
just
was
interesting.
incredible. Yeah.
It's just really interesting the fact that we can list off so many of these names that are kind of household names. And I mean, the only thing I could kind of think of to think about this is just, especially for white audiences who are watching this, it kind of makes you realize how much you pay attention to the other white actors and how little you know about the black actors. I don't know.
That's entirely possible. And I remember this was marketed as in that classic Oscar bait style where, it's towards the end of the year. It's branded as a think piece. It's branded as a social issues piece. So they're going to find big name actors that they can shove into the trailer as much as they possibly can.
Yeah, that is actually a really interesting thought, because I rented the Blu-ray for this film, and so before I watched it, you have the menu screen, and almost every shot that cycled through on the menu screen was just little shots of those big name actors' face, and it just kind of cycled through with some of the main character, but it was like, oh, I know that guy, oh, I know that guy, oh, I know that guy.
Right, and they don't even, like, in the film, they don't even get that much screen time. Like, you don't see Benedict Cumberbatch really that much. I think the only one you see a lot is Michael Fassbender, and he's a total freaking lunatic. So
yeah, and then another thing that I was thinking just now is that as far as Oscar politics go, it may be almost a bait kind of a thing to get a broader Caucasian audience who may see the subject matter and not feel very interested, but if they see a lot of names that they know, it's like, oh, okay, I'd like to see a movie with Michael Fassbender and Benedict Cumberbatch as a preacher in the South, and Paul Giamatti and all these people that I know. And
right.
It kind of
it's a way to avoid, I guess, being this sounds really bad, but it's a way to avoid being pigeonholed as an African or as a black movie. Like, it's a way to market larger and not be like a blaxploitation film, which it's not. Like, even if they cast like no name white actors and freaking Don Cheadle as all of the African American roles, it would be still an incredible movie. Like, it would be amazing. But that totally could be, because when we're talking about Oscars, we're not just talking about art, we're talking about politics. Like, we're talking about studios trying to get awards. So
right. And also, I mean, it's a movie that a wide range of people need to see, and I mean, a lot of white people should probably watch this movie because this is our heritage, like it or not, which you shouldn't, by the way. But
I really hope no one likes it.
Right. But just saying that it is a good way to kind of, like you said, not make it a film that people say, oh, it's about slavery. I don't really like that topic. I won't go see it. But it's not, oh, it's about, oh, but this person's in it? Okay. Because people do go to see movies just because of actors that they like and they respect their work.
Yeah. I mean, we all do it. Like, I will watch anything with Benedict Cumberbatch in it. So, that would have gotten me to watch this movie. I didn't back then, but for other reasons. I was in college. But
right,
I'm glad we watched it. I'm glad we watched it. It's interesting look. I mean, you read about this stuff in textbooks, but it doesn't really hit home until you get that visceral, subjective experience of watching something like this.
It's convicting and humbling experience to watch this film.
It is. Again,
like, and hard. It's a hard watch.
Oh, it's such a hard watch. Yeah, like I said before, it dares you not to blink, and you feel. At least I felt like I had to step up to that challenge. So,
yeah.
Watch it. It's good.
Yeah. So before we move on, just kind of want to mention the other Oscars that this film won. So we already mentioned, again, I don't want to say her name, but the young woman who played Patsy won Best Supporting Actress, and this film also won Best Adapted Screenplay because the story is based on Solomon Northup's autobiography. again, we don't. I mean, it's historical fact. Can we say that he returns to his family in the north?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, like it happens. He gets returned. Like
So
I feel like we need to say that almost like it has
yeah, it does have a happy ending.
kind of happy,
Well,
as happy as possible in that
bittersweet
situation.
ending. Yeah, a very bittersweet ending. But he ends up writing his life story, and now we have
Oh,
this film for a lot of people to enjoy.
on to our next movie, which is also crazy, but in a different way.
Yeah. So our next film is Birdman from 2014 by Alejandro Inarritu. Inarritu.
The Dave that we can't say any names.
I know, right? So this film is a little bit different. Actually, quite a bit different.
It's different from most things.
Yeah, it is. It's a very unique viewing experience. This is the film people may have heard buzz about. Oh, Birdman is all one shot. The whole movie is filmed in one shot. So that's
Spoiler
kind
alert,
of
it's not.
it is not shot in one shot.
But it is quite an interesting experience.
Yeah, so let me just give a quick overview as much as I can. There's kind of too much in this movie to describe all of it, but basically, so our main character, Riggin, played by Michael Keaton, is a man who used to act in a series of superhero films called the Birdman films. I think in the story he made 3 of them and then passed up on the 4th one, and now he is getting older and trying to reclaim a sense of purpose and artistic legacy. So he decides to adapt a short story by Raymond Carver called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love into a Broadway play as his new thing. And so we start a couple days before the previews for the show opens, and then we go until opening night and all of the insanity that happens right before this show opens.
Right. It's an interesting spiraling effect, both of character conflicts. You know what happens when you get all of these high-powered creative types trying to make a thing together, struggling at the last moment, and also the inner conflict of Riggin as he tries to understand who he really is. Is he the celebrity? Is he the character? Is he a good dad? Is he a good person? It gets deep. There's layers. There's lots of layers.
There are layers on so many levels. There are levels of layers in the fact that this film is also very meta because it is a sometimes direct criticism of the entertainment industry, both at a theater level and at a Hollywood level. There's literally a point in the film where a character looks straight in the camera and talks about how audiences only care about things that blow up and they don't care about a lot of philosophical moralizing, which is what most of this movie is about. It kind of takes the entertainment industry and points a mirror at it, and tells it to take a deep, hard look at itself.
Right. It's weird that Hollywood likes movies like that so much. But,
Yeah, it
but
is.
it does.
It's a strange thing.
You always see those do well in award shows. So again, we just talked about a movie that was very culturally relevant. Social issues. It's a movie that's all about the industry, and guess what the industry likes talking about?
Itself.
Yeah.
But there's also some other things that kind of I feel like in the last couple of years we've got a couple of these movies that feel like they feel a little gimmicky. I hate to say it, but I'm thinking specifically of like this film where the movie's all one shot. It's such a cinematic marvel, and it's great. I mean, don't get me wrong, the cinematography is is really amazing and intricate and took a lot of hard work and stuff. And I'm not trying to demean that at all. But we've also got movies like Boyhood, came out around the same time. It took, what, 12 years to make that film.
Right, they made it in real time as the actor aged.
Right, and stuff like that. So it's kind of the way the film is shot, the subject matter, the actors, everything in this movie is kind of setting itself up for awards.
Right. It's there are these very bold choices, but then they get marketed on, like, it feels like it gets marketed on those bold choices alone, to garner attention, and then come away with this sense of gimmickiness, which might not be that might not be the case. And I think in Birdman, like, it's a bold choice that works, for the story in this artistic metaphorical fashion.
Yeah, it does. It does.
But
have
everybody
purpose.
talks about it so much, like that became the buzz around Birdman. Is like, oh my god, it's all one shot. And
Yeah,
then,
that's literally all I knew about it going into this. I knew it was about
see,
a guy who used to
exactly.
be a superhero actor, and I knew it was filmed all in one take. I knew nothing else about it.
Right. And have we mentioned just the perfect casting yet? That it's Michael Keaton.
Yeah, I did want to mention that. So going back to the meta-ness, like I said, Michael Keaton plays a character who used to be a superhero actor, passed up on a film, and it literally mirrors Michael Keaton's career as he did 2 Batman films and then passed up on a third one. And there's actually a point where, okay, so another thing about this movie is that they actually reference real people. Like, it's set in today. So they reference Robert Downey Jr., they reference George Clooney, they reference what's his face, Jeremy Renner, and stuff like this. But the point where he mentions George Clooney, I can't remember if this is a thing that actually happened or if it's like a dream that he's describing. But Michael Keaton says something about, I was on this plane and Michael Keaton was on this plane and there was a lot of really bad turbulence and everyone was crying and the media was going crazy. And I guarantee that George Clooney is the only one who was getting coverage at that point, and I was just kind of invisible in the back. And it's kind of funny because George Clooney took over the Batman character after Michael Keaton decided to turn it down. So there's just so many levels going on, like, that reflect the actual real Hollywood and also the story and all this stuff.
Yeah, it's like this labyrinth of self-referentialism because it's about the industry. So how and superhero movies and celebrity and so many things that just get referenced back to each other all over the park, which I think is one of those things that works so well with the idea of the simulated one continuous shot, because again, it's not one continuous shot, but it feels like someone is stuck in the swirling, spiraling maze of contradictions, and that's kind of who Michael Keaton's character is. Like, he's this character who's stuck within not only himself but these different levels of identity that have been created both by himself as a celebrity and by the public, and by his family and by his co-workers, that he has to navigate. And he's spiraling around this labyrinth and he's getting dizzy doing it. And he finally finds a way out of it at the end, that we won't mention, but it's quite dramatic.
Yeah. And on another level, the fact that it's all one shot kind of mirrors a more theatrical experience, since he's putting on a stage play and we're kind of mixing Hollywood and theater. Is that, I mean, you get one shot and you have all the action kind of playing out in front of you as you're sitting stationary, in the same way that an entire play takes place in front of you while you're sitting in the audience, and sets move in and out of the screen and actors and stuff, but you're still, it's all just one thing going on constantly.
Right.
Another thing about actors that I don't think, and also I don't know how intentional it is that Michael Keaton is in this role. I feel like it has to have been intentional, but I don't know how much from the beginning it was Michael Keaton has to be this part, or how much stuff was added in to mirror his life afterwards. But another thing that I feel like is more coincidental is the fact that Emma Stone was working on, was in the middle of shooting, I believe, the second Amazing Spider-Man film when she filmed this. This film took 30 days or so to shoot. But she plays Michael Keaton's daughter, and so she's kind of in the next generation of superhero movies and is kind of this other generational level.
Yeah, and you remember that Edward Norton played the Hulk in the MCU before Mark Ruffalo did.
Yeah, I forgot about that. So I mean,
yeah,
I guess everyone is in the superhero,
right? It's
family.
also kind of this commentary on how pervasive superhero movies have gotten. Like, everybody's involved in them or tied into them in some way. Yeah, and if you take a look at the cast list of this movie, you'll notice again it is stuffed to the brim with big name actors who again are very, very good at what they do, but the casting feels like an effort to get to get that award nomination. Because I mean, when was the last time you saw Zach Galifianakis in that small of a role? Like that's kind of hard to imagine. Or even like Naomi Watts. She's in a decent supporting role, but I can't imagine her out of primary or secondary like female spot.
Right, and you mentioned Zach Galifianakis, and he's playing a very different character than he does most of the time, from what I know of his career. And he's playing kind of the straight man, the guy who's kind of the only sane one, who's trying to keep everything together, which is kind of interesting. But it's also, taking big names and putting them in a dramatic movie is kind of the formula for awards.
Right. And that's just, again, like that's what you market it on, is how many big names can we squeeze onto one poster? How many big names can we squeeze into one trailer?
And literally the poster is just a list of names. Over half the poster is literally a list of all the names.
Yeah,
Michael Keaton, Zach Galifianakis, Edward
the most
Norton.
recognizable faces at the bottom.
Yeah, and then you put all the faces.
Exactly. And again, we're not saying that these movies get by on their merit of just what names they can sign to contracts, but they're really good. They're really good movies, but they're not marketed as just being really good movies. You're supposed to assume they're really good movies because of the way they're marketed.
Right. It's again that baiting people into come seeing it, because it would still be a good movie if there were a bunch of really green actors, but
who had the talent. Yeah.
Right. But the name actors just kind of make you go see it and get it noticed. And even some of the technical stuff that we're talking about, like the one long shot thing. Yes, it's kind of gimmicky, but it's also incredibly impressive. Like it's incredibly hard to pull that off, because even though it isn't one long shot, there are many ways, some more obvious than others, that they cut between shots. So sometimes we'll pan up to the sky and see a skyline shot, and then we'll do a time lapse, and then we'll come back down, and okay, clearly that was a change of shot. And then other times it'll be as we're panning from one character to another, in the middle of the pan, when there's a lot of motion blurring and stuff going on, you can easily transition into a different shot that starts with the same pan and then goes into something different. There's one of those pretty early on in the film, which is a way that they transition the time.
Right.
So we pan from Michael Keaton alone in his dressing room to the couch where there wasn't anyone before, but in the middle of the pan, after Michael Keaton is out of frame, we change the shot while it still looks like we're in the same pan, and suddenly there's other people there and we're in a different situation. So that's one way to progress time without changing the shot, because if you're just doing one shot, obviously you're kind of stuck to we're watching this in real time, which you can't do. It would be very difficult to pull off a literal real time,
and more importantly,
2-hour story.
Really expensive.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh, could you imagine I mean, it would be nearly impossible if you shot
I'm just
even
thinking
like
about the data. I don't even know if that amount of data would
it
be
wouldn't fit.
possible.
I don't think it would fit on your standard card. Like, even going back to like Alfred Hitchcock and Rope, like he wanted to do one continuous shot, but you can only record 10 minutes of film at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to do a very similar technique. But I also kind of like the way that forced them into this camera work. Partially because I find that the best creative decisions almost always come out of problem solving.
Yeah, limitations and stuff.
Yeah. So this is this very the camera work has this very nervous, anxious energy which matches the tone of the film. Like I could feel myself getting anxious watching the movie. I don't know if that was just me. That could
I
just
think the
be
drums,
just me,
honestly, I think the drums help. I think a lot of the film is built to make you feel that anxiety that he has. There's this really strange drum beat that makes up the majority of the score. There's
And the drummer
sometimes
keeps appearing,
diegetic,
too.
sometimes, yeah, non-diegetic. And then there's and then definitely that handheld. They kind of switch between steady cam and handheld. And one thing that kind of bothers me about it, especially with the handheld bits, is that you at that point you have to use digital image stabilization, which drives me nuts because you can kind of see the background kind of wobbling a little bit, and it just feels a little off. And that's something that I always have to battle with some of the stuff that I shoot. And seeing it in this film kind of was like, no, you should be... when you have all those resources, you should not be able to see that.
Right. Yeah.
Which I'm probably the only person who notices that, but it was kind of irking me.
Yeah, I didn't notice it at all, but I'm sure it's there. Like, I'm sure the next time I watch this movie, if assuming that I ever had time to rewatch things,
right?
I'm sure I would notice it again. But it definitely gives it this very just super unique look to the film that matches the energy of the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, we should mention before we move on, the other Oscars that this movie ended up winning. It won Best Directing, Best Screenplay, and Best Cinematography, which, to be fair, that cinematography was right on. It was amazing.
Right. So it took home some of the big ones. Not a full sweep, but
Those are rare.
Apparently, big names talk about the industry and do something technically innovative, and that's your recipe for success, according to Birdman in 2014.
And so on to our last movie, Spotlight, the 2015 Best Picture winner. This movie covers, again, a very sensitive social issue, and also just a straight up controversy that broke around 2002, 2003, I think, if I remember correctly. Maybe 2001.
2001, 2002. It was like January 2002, I believe.
Right, because 9/11 happens in the movie.
Yeah, in the middle of the whole thing.
Yeah, but it's not about 9/11. It is about the Catholic Church child molestation controversy that broke out first in Boston and then spread to across the country and then the world. This is like the
controversy
spread. Yeah. Like it had been going on like all over the place, and then first they find out in Boston, and that's the story that we're looking at is the story of these reporters, the special spotlight investigative team of the Boston Globe, and their search into this controversy that they're trying to uncover and prove exists. And their very personal relationships with that, because as we find out, the Catholic community in Boston is very strong and very connected, and each one of the reporters is affected in some way.
Yeah, this film is really interesting, especially pitted with the other two that we watched this week. It's very different technically. So I mean, we see a kind of theme of true stories, very tragic story, but the way it's presented is not flashy at all. It's not uh, pretentious, I guess. It's very straight. It's
Yeah,
presented very straight.
yeah, it's presented in this very straight laced, almost respectful manner. I found they were trying. It almost felt like they were trying to let the story speak for itself, and take
Yeah,
like this kind of like very respectful, very deferential stance on it, because it's hard. It's one of those things where statistics blur the individual tragedy, but they discover 80 priests in Boston that have molested children, or I think it's over 80.
yeah,
They've molested multiple children each. So it's this very intense thing, and they approach it with this less is more philosophy. And I made this comment to you, I'm sure, but like the first half hour, kind of was waiting for something to happen. But once they really start getting into this investigation, this maze of information, and the Catholic Church trying to hide this information, it gets really interesting, and you get invested along with the different reporters getting invested in their own ways. Like, it feels like you're along for the ride on this investigation.
yeah. And kind of going back to the idea of a movie knowing how to take its time, this film kind of does that, but not in the sense of we're holding on shots and stuff like that, but just in the sense that it doesn't feel like it has to do anything to spice it up. Like, it doesn't have to, add anything on top of what it's already presenting, because what it's presenting is so weighty, that adding stuff to kind of pander to audience attention spans would almost feel, like you were saying, disrespectful to the subject matter. And I almost don't even, I would kind of call it a journalistic, reflecting the main characters, a journalistic point of view. Is very objective. We're just kind of given stuff, and we're kind of made to observe it and make our own conclusions from it. But I mean, it's all given to us. There's not a lot of like gray area, I guess.
This almost feels like a missed beat in the whole Oscar formula, Best Picture formula.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's not a lot you can read into it. It's not something that you kind of have to infer hidden meanings and deep meanings and stuff. Like I said, it's very objective. It presents itself to you in a non-flashy way, and you're right. It doesn't feel like the big flashy pretentious movies that we've seen in some of the other ones that are kind of like begging to be given awards. It almost feels like this movie was just kind of doing its thing and telling a story of something that happened, and then accidentally got Best Picture.
Oh, I'm sure it was marketed like for because it's a serious
Right, but
social issue picture.
it doesn't feel like it's like throwing it in your face.
True. I also I get what you're saying. Like, if you actually watch this, I had no idea what this movie was about until I actually watched it, because I had just heard that it won Best Picture, and I've heard a lot of people say good things about it, but I've never actually seen a trailer for it. But it is very unpretentious in the way that it presents the story. I mean, even like the actors are played down. Like, Mark Ruffalo's haircut in this movie is awful.
Yeah.
That bugged me the entire time. I was like, push it one direction, man.
And he's kind of got like this mumbly thing. He's not like everyone is played like a real person. Like, they all are
like
perfect Hollywood people.
The new editor is like played by Liev Schreiber, and I would I'm sure I'd have to tell anybody who watched that for the first time and never seen Liev Schreiber before that was Sabretooth from the Wolverine movies. Like, it's just this weirdly nice breath of fresh air that I wasn't expecting to stumble across this week, because it's not the kind of movie that you think about other than like purely like subject matter. and having like you know, a decent headliners list of their cast. It's not the kind of movie that you'd watch and be like, oh, that was marketed for the Oscars, but it was,
Right.
and it won, and that's really cool.
So, just looking at it narratively, one thing that I wanted to point out is the fact that this film stays with the Spotlight journalism team. It does not ever. So, we've got kind of two things going on. We've got the journalists investigating this huge scandal and cover up by the Catholic Church, and then we've got the Catholic Church fighting to cover this scandal up. And we hear lots of things about them having fought journalists before and people who've tried to break the story before, and so that pressure is coming to them. But we never ever go to the point of view of the Catholic Church. We always stay with the journalists. Anything that we know about what the Catholic Church hierarchy in Boston is thinking is either told to one of the journalists that we're following, or they hear from another person. It's one of those things where you think of any film with an antagonist, and there's a good portion of the film, 40 or 30%, that's probably spent with the antagonist either fretting about what they're going to do or making plans and stuff. But this is all from the point of view of the protagonist, so all we know is what they know from start to finish.
Yeah, you're right. It's that very, again, like what you said before, it's that very journalistic point of view of uncovering the story as it goes along. That's super fascinating, and it's a really interesting way. And I found myself, as opposed to maybe the first 5 minutes where I'll admit I wasn't very interested in the movie. But by the end, I was on the edge of my futon. Like I was, I was super into it. Like just trying to figure out what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess you can compare that with films like Doubt, which actually has the same subject but told fictionally and from within the church, or from within this monastery, I guess, where it's the other point of view. So it's just interesting that we don't get that two-sided, but it doesn't feel like it's lacking anything. Like it's still gripping just to follow the one side of the story and kind of figure it out with the characters.
Exactly. Yeah, and we should also mention before we move on to overall notes that this did win Best Screenplay, which that's the strength of this film is the screenplay and the subtlety of the acting at hand.
All right, so let's move on to our overall notes and talk about what all this means for this year's Oscars that have just passed, if you're listening to this, and all the Oscars. So if you would like to watch any of these movies, you can stop it now because spoilers are incoming in 5, 4, 3, 2, go for it, Alex.
Okay, so Brad Pitt becomes a mailman, then Saul Northrop goes north, has a grandbaby, and gains his freedom. And then in Birdman, Michael Keaton shoots his nose off on stage on opening night. The play becomes a best hit, and then he jumps out a window and flies off into the sunset. And then in Spotlight, they break the news story. There's a controversy in the Catholic Church that spreads across the entire globe, and you can read about that because that actually did happen, and it's probably in a newspaper online.
Yeah, I'll include a link to the actual Spotlight article. Also, just to clarify, the Birdman ending is much more ambiguous than Alex would lead you to believe.
No, it's not.
He he jumps out a window, and Emma Stone looks up into the air, but she could just be happy that he's out of his misery, or she could be looking at this meteor, which they keep showing shots of randomly throughout the movie, that's hurtling towards Earth, and just be happy that all of this human existence stuff is about to end.
I like my ending better.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of ambiguity in Birdman just in general, in the fact that he kind of has the Force
He
where
does, right.
But the funny thing is, no one ever sees him use the Force, because the one time he trashes his room with it, as soon as Zach Galifianakis comes in, he's picking stuff up and throwing it around. So I kind of assume that he was just doing that, and his Force abilities are all in his head.
Yeah, that part is totally within the head. But
He
all the
does
parts
have
where
some
he
mental
flies,
stuff.
he actually flies. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
If you'd
The
like
other
to
time,
vote on this, feel free to tweet us.
the other
Links at
time
the
he
end of the
jumped off the
podcast.
roof. Yeah. Can Riggin fly?
Can Riggin fly?
Can Riggin fly?
Yes, he can.
All right.
Team, he can fly.
All right. So yeah, just overall, these three movies kind of show, just first of all, a variety of kind of blatant, I guess, artistry, quote unquote, in each film, in the fact that each one has a different level of look how beautiful our movie is. Because we have in 12 Years a Slave, it's very well shot. A couple shots kind of stick out to you. It's very pretty, shot on film, but it's still kind of cut and put together like a normal film. Birdman takes this to an extreme where it does this really long shot, very technical, like extremely difficult to pull off, and then coming back to Spotlight on the other end of the spectrum, which is very straight, very naturalistic, kind of locked down almost pretty much the whole time, and except for walk and talks, I guess, and kind of pretty flat lighting, like office room lighting, daylight, all this kind of stuff. So it's an interesting range of the technical in your faceness.
True, and part of that comes from beyond just the movies themselves to kind of the way we've as a culture, as a media culture, have become used to thinking about Oscar movies, where you're supposed to think about them in this very artsy way. Like they're supposed to be like this pinnacle of artistic brilliance that that Hollywood can put out, and that's kind of that was kind of the source of the Oscars in the 30s. People they start, or in the 20s, people the progressives finally turned their attention towards the movie industry, which had finally gotten big around the mid 20s, like genuinely big, like the way we think about it today. And then they the way that the studios try to get around being trust busted, because at that point, they had vertical integration, they owned everything, was to present themselves as this artistic format, which worked for a while. And that's also why, they were so susceptible to like the Catholic League and the League of Decency, like clamping on these restrictions to them. But then they did get busted in the 50s, and people were with the Paramount decision, and they had to sell off their theater chains, which is why you can't go to like a MGM theater in America, but you can go to an MGM theater in France.
Right.
But then then you have the entire breakdown of like the studios fell apart to a point, and then new waves had a chance to break into the industry, and the industry's never been the same, yada yada yada. Same kind of things happening now with the internet and YouTube and Netflix and stuff like that. But the tradition of the Oscars was already around, and that had kind of become the way that the movies had started to think about themselves. Even if they acted in this very businesslike manner at the highest point in the studios, they would still do they still present themselves as this very artsy format. So that's how that started, and then just kept going well into the modern era. I mean, we still have the Oscars, obviously. Okay, so that's kind of how the Oscars came to be, but very recently, in the past 5 years, we've kind of seen a shift in how the Oscar voting process works, and I don't know too much about it, but I know you've looked into this, Jonathan.
Yeah, and not an expert either, and we'll include a link in the blog post that explains it a little better than I can. But basically, it went from a straight popular vote to a process that kind of weeds out more controversial films that tend to fall in the I loved it or I hated it category, and kind of narrows it down to films that the voters might have ranked in their second or third favorite spot.
At its most basic level, instant runoff voting involves ranking a number of choices rather than choosing just one. Then, the choice with the fewest votes is removed, and then those votes for that candidate have their votes counted according to their second favorite candidate. Then the candidate that has the fewest votes is removed, and so on. It goes all the way until a candidate has 50% plus one
a tragic
of the vote.
true event or about the film industry is a second pick for a lot of people because that's a good fallback, and then they put something that was more innovative or more controversial as their top pick. The top pick usually gets weeded out, and that's why we're seeing a trend like we have.
Yeah, and I definitely can see why that lends itself to some of those things that we keep seeing pop up in quote unquote Oscar bait movies. I'm not a super big fan of that saying because it feels like we're bashing the Oscars, but we're really not. Like it's a fun thing. It's fun to celebrate the creation of film and the creation of art. I mean, we both love it. That's something that we really like to talk about. Obviously, I mean, we made a podcast about it, but also like art just doesn't lend itself well to superlatives. Like there is no real best film like that. This sounds like a cop out, but it's not. Certain people are going to like some things better and certain people are going to like other things better. So like what you said with the system, you just don't end up with anything that people are super passionate about, and nothing that's super divisive ending up being on a number or winning the Oscar. You tend to see things that people feel safe about, things that cover social issues that, everybody's supposed to agree on, like slavery is bad. Yes, everybody can agree on that. Very easy to come to that conclusion. Or, critiquing the movie industry. That's just something that the industry loves. So that's something that's easily ends up in the top three.
Yeah, that's actually kind of the most ironic one for me, I think, with Birdman, because there's a big theme in Birdman is a critique of artistic critique. And there's a whole scene where Michael Keaton's character kind of goes on a rant against a theater critic about how she just gets to sit in her comfy chair and judge this art, while meanwhile he's putting his whole life on stage and risking all of his finances and everything. And this film about the messed up system of artistic critique goes on to win one of the highest artistic critical awards that we have.
Right. Exactly. So, but you see movies like that win a lot. Think about The Artist from a few years ago.
Right. The Artist, The King's Speech, which is a historical event, but it's also about performance and knowing how to speak to large amounts of people despite fears and stuff like that. But like we said,
Argo
is also a true story that also relates to the film industry in that they're putting on a fake film. I forgot about that. I always think about it as like a rescue film.
Yeah.
But it does have a lot of Hollywood critique, like satire.
And then in 2000, you had Gladiator, which is about an entertainment industry.
Are you not entertained? Although, if you want to take it as kind of a meta criticism, you could see it as saying that how brutal the entertainment industry is.
There you go. Yeah, getting deep on deep on filmings.
What audiences want to see is just carnage and
As they say in Birdman. Yeah, exactly.
Right. But I think the biggest takeaway is that just to be nominated for one of these awards is basically the honor that you can get from it. I don't think you can have a best picture for a year. There are so many films, and there are so many, especially nowadays with the amount of independent film and stuff, films that would never make it into the Academy circle that may be better than some of the big headline films out there. I mean, there's just so much content that you can't say this one was better than all of the other ones.
Right. I mean, even with this is the first year that we had a online distributor or online production company have a movie nominated for Best Picture in Manchester by the Sea. So, which was done by Amazon, by the way, if you're wondering.
Right.
So it sounds, as cheesy as it sounds, that just being nominated is the honor. It really is the honor. Like being in that creme de la creme, like the top 6 films of the year is not anything to laugh at. Like that's incredible, regardless of who wins Best Picture. I think almost everybody knows at this point within the industry that Best Picture, it's nice, but it's not super determinate. It's not super reflective of the work itself.
Yeah, and I mean the other places that you can look if you want to see where films excel are the individual guilds within Hollywood. For example, the Visual Effects Society Awards, or the Directors Guild Awards, or the Screen Actors Guild Awards, and stuff like that. Those are places where you can see a different arrangement of films and actors and talent that were nominated from people who have a more direct relationship with the skill that goes into that specific area. So there are lots of other places to find a slightly more definitive list of or view of which films did really well in certain areas. But the Oscars is just kind of a little bit of pageantry is nice every now and then to recognize art and all the hard work that these people are putting in to help the rest of us Joe Schmoes escape from our lives for a little bit. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to be watching next week, and I will let Alex take it away because this is his week.
Right, so a few weeks ago we did Jonathan's favorite director, Christopher Nolan, and next week is going to be my favorite director, Wes Anderson. And just up front, I didn't even know that was associated with hipsters. I don't even think I knew what a hipster was when I found Wes Anderson. So if you think I'm a hipster because of that...
Wes Anderson before it was cool?
Exactly. Yeah. That is what I'm saying. You go to school in Austin for 3 years and it's stuck on you, but whatever. Anyway, the movies we're watching next week. So our first movie is going to be Rushmore from 1998. Then we're going to watch The Life Aquatic from 2004. And then we're going to watch Moonrise Kingdom from 2013, which is available on Netflix if anyone is curious.
Yeah, so that'll be kind of going back to our director structure, which we haven't done for a couple weeks, but I think it'll be a good range from his kind of breakout movie to his kind of rise to almost total mainstream at this point.
Right. He's kind of gotten into the public eye, but maintained his indie stature as well at the same time.
And he has an incredibly identifiable style, so we'll have lots of technical stuff to talk about and get back into our cinematic rhetoric discussions from all the way back in Jarmusch Week.
Exactly. I'm excited. Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at @JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Geringer.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at jssatchel.wordpress.com/blog.
Talk to you next week.
All right, see ya.